once you're not afraid, refinement's easier, right? When everything is scary, it's hard to learn. And when you realize you're just going to handle whatever happens next, now you can open up a much more curious mindset, much more exploratory. You're less afraid of clinging to something so you don't make a mistake, and more capable of thinking, what can I learn from this? What can I try? What's the nuance? What's new and different here?
That is board certified small animal internal medicine specialist, professor, and researcher, Dr. Kate Creevy. And this is the VIN Foundation's Veterinary Pulse podcast. I'm Jordan Ben-Shia, Executive Director of the VIN Foundation. Join me as I talk with veterinary colleagues about critical topics and share stories. Stories that connect us as humans, as animals, as a veterinary community. This podcast is made possible by individuals like you who donate to the VIN Foundation. Thank you. Please check the episode notes for bios, links, and information mentioned. Welcome. Today we have a guest I'm very excited about, and I'd like to welcome to the podcast Dr. Katie Creevy. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
I'm very excited to have this conversation and to share your story. Let's start with, your journey into veterinary medicine. Was there this aha moment where you just thought, yep, my love for bunnies and animals and fish is enough, and this is my lifelong goal?
I frequently reflect that there wasn't a time when I didn't know that I wanted to do this. I think that's more true of veterinarians than a lot of other professions, that many of us were drawn to this lifestyle from a very young age before we even understood the notion of a job or a career or profession. That was true of me. I just always wanted to be around animals. I always wanted to understand biology. We had a very biology-focused household. My father is a surgeon. He's retired now. My mom had a master's degree in microbiology that she earned back in the 60s when we mostly didn't let women study the sciences.
Yeah.
And so I grew up in a household where we valued science. We talked about science. We talked about how the world worked. We talked about medicine. We talked about why doctors did these tests or what these medications were doing inside your body. We talked about that stuff. And so I think that was very natural for me to connect to animals. And I just wanted to understand all those things about animals that we talked about humans in my household. So I always knew I wanted a life with animals. And when I came to understand what careers looked like, I wanted a career with animals. I entertained a few other options along the way, and nothing ever really drew me away from that goal.
Hearing about your mom and studying science at that time, have you heard of the book Lessons in Chemistry?
No.
Oh my gosh. I highly recommend that to our audience. Highly recommend it to you.
Okay.
I'll put a link in the episode notes. It's a fantastic book about a woman who's a scientist I think it's set in the 50s or 40s perhaps, but incredible book. So you knew you loved animals and you always want a life for animals. You figured out that vet med was your path. And where did you go to veterinary school?
I went to the University of Tennessee as an out-of-state student. I know that recruiting and helping early career people understand veterinary education is one of the goals of the VIN Foundation.
It is.
And so I will comment that I made that choice. I made that choice knowing of the financial penalty that choice would carry. And I think that has only gotten more challenging in the 4 years since I went to that school. A big reason that I made that choice was where we were living. We actually had two addresses, and I could have been an in-state student at either Ohio State. We had an Ohio address. I also had a Kentucky address, so I could have been an in-state student at Auburn in Alabama, which contracts with the state of Kentucky. So I did apply as an Ohio State resident to all of the programs. I did, including apply to Ohio State. For me, there were a number of things about the curriculum at Tennessee that were more appealing. It was a relatively smaller class, and it was a non-tracking curriculum. Mm-hmm. And we almost don't have those anymore, but we did then. And so it was really important to me to not have to choose which of the animals I wanted to study. I wanted to do it all.
Yeah.
And so I made an intentional choice for this out of state education and the associated debt because I wanted that program. Ohio State was also in a big transition period at the time, and they had a lot of building going on, and they had a lot of change in leadership. And candidly, my interview there, I didn't meet anyone who was happy. And I didn't feel that that was a very welcoming environment in that moment. And so I was an out-of-state student at the University of Tennessee, and I got a great education.
Yeah. And I think that, first of all, you having that foresight that you were purposely making that decision for a reason, right? And we do try to encourage pre-vets just at least go in with eyes wide open, right? And understanding there's no Harvard effect with veterinary school, but also there is value in what culture do you feel like you're really going to fit in with, right? And I think I'm hearing that from you, which I think is very valuable because it worked out really well for you.
It did.
So where did you go from Tennessee, and what was your experience like in vet med there?
So again, it was a relatively small class size and a non-tracking curriculum. And I had just a lot of hands-on experience, a lot of personal attention from the faculty. That was all really, really valuable. I mean, many of those faculty encounters and those mentors remain mentors and friends to this day. I chose to pursue a rotating internship. So I ended up at the University of Minnesota for a small animal rotating internship. So the College of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities, which was awesome. I loved it. When I was choosing internships, I really wanted to prioritize a high caseload, but at that time, there were few private practice internships. Mostly they were academic. And academic programs tend to have lower caseloads than private practices. So, now as students are considering internship experiences, I tend to suggest that folks who want a high caseload experience, who feel that's the learning environment that they need at that step, look carefully at the private practice internships. And folks who want a more didactic experience, look carefully at the academic internships. For me, there were very few private practice internships at the time, which I applied to, but I really wanted a high caseload experience. And Minnesota is one of the higher caseload teaching hospitals, particularly the emergency service. And it was great. I learned a ton. I was working all the time. I was tired a lot. I was engaged intellectually. I was engaged physically. I was challenged by the cases and the clients and the personal self-management. I mean, that's what you want in an internship. I told myself that I wanted to go into my internship, and when I was done, I wanted to be bomb-proof. And I wanted to know that whatever was going to happen, I could handle it. And I remember early in my internship, again, this was back in the days when we used these things that are called books. They're on paper and they don't have a battery. And there was a little book that we would all carry around, all of us interns, that was kind of the emergency cheat sheet book. And you could look up any diagnosis that would come in on emergency, a kind of a quick treatment of like, what are your initial stabilization steps? What are your initial drug steps? Whatever. And so I had gotten paged from the front desk to be told that, and I used this book very heavily in the beginning of my internship. And I remember a day, maybe 2/3 of the way through the year, that I got paged from the front desk. There was an emergency. So I got my book out to look it up. And I remember realizing, I don't need to look it up. Whatever is going to walk through the door, I'm going to handle it. I might not know everything about everything. I might not know the ultimate diagnosis. I might not be able to save this animal, but I'm going to handle it. And that was exactly what I wanted out of an internship here. So it was a really fun moment to realize that had happened, that I just felt unafraid. Whatever was going to walk in the door, I was just going to handle it.
What an incredible feeling. And you must have felt so proud of yourself to set off with that goal and to feel, okay, I know, right? Because going in with, I really want a heavy caseload, you don't hear that very often, right? And is that because you just wanted the breadth of the experience and to be able to say, I want to be bomb-proof. And the way to get bomb-proof is to get that massive experience.
That's exactly what I wanted. Yeah, exactly what you said.
I think that's great.
Yeah, it was fun. And it was fun to, and again, not to also recognize how much more I had to learn and how much more refinement could happen. But once you're not afraid, refinement's easier. Right? When everything is scary, it's hard to learn. And when you realize you're just going to handle whatever happens next, now you can open up a much more curious mindset, much more exploratory. You're less afraid of clinging to something so you don't make a mistake, and more capable of thinking, what can I learn from this? What can I try? What's the nuance? What's new and different here? So that was a really formative experience. It was great to have.
I think that's true about fear in all aspects in our life. And I was just listening to a leadership podcast with Brene Brown about this line of fear and how you act as a leader when you are above that line and you don't have those concerns, or you don't let fear drive you, versus when you're below. And I think that's the case from a leadership perspective and just as a human perspective in our lives, right? And for you to have that and think, okay, I'm not going to let fear drive this, probably made you such a better veterinarian in those experiences. Not that you weren't ignorant to the fact that there was more to learn, to your point, right? But fear is not that driver. And it's a great lesson for us in life of, if we just let go of that, what really are we capable of outside of that zone?
Yeah. We think about that as educators all the time, because learning happens when confronted with new situations. And so learning always happens in the stretch zone, right? If I just have students do things that are very, very easy for them, that are very routine for them, they're not learning. And so to learn, to continue to build your skills, you have to be stretched. But if you stretch somebody too far, then they're in the panic zone, and then nobody can learn in the panic zone, right? And the same, I think, is true for us as clinicians, particularly early career clinicians. If you're just completely overwhelmed by the work in front of you, you're just in survival mode and you're not learning. And if you get to a point where the work is substantial, but I can do it, now I can move through some of those things with routine and focus on, what am I actually learning? What do I need to learn? Because I was not in the panic zone anymore. I was in the stretch zone, and that's exactly where you want to be.
Yeah. Kudos to you for setting yourself up for success like that.
Yeah, it worked out pretty well, right? I mean, obviously, I suppose the story could have had a different ending.
So let's continue with the story. What was your experience after that internship?
So I knew that I wanted to pursue internal medicine. I knew that I wanted to do a residency. And in those days, there weren't any support structures financially for that. So as we already know, I went to school out of state, and so I had pretty significant debt. And in those days, there was no income sensitive loan repayment. There was no public loan forgiveness. There was most of the further training forgiveness was also going away. So you couldn't get your loans suspended or partially paid back if you did further training. If you actually earned a degree, you could have your loans temporarily suspended and not have to pay on them while you earned a degree. But most residencies didn't include a PhD or other research degree. And so I couldn't afford to do a residency. Like, my internship ended and I couldn't apply for residency because I knew that I couldn't support myself while I did one. I would have defaulted on my loans. And that seemed like a bad choice. So I said, well, I will get a job and I will continue to live like a student and save up all the money that I can until I can afford to go do a residency while using my savings to pay on my loans so that I don't default on my loans. And so that's what I did. So I went into emergency practice. I was trained to see and handle a lot of emergencies. Emergency practice is one of the more lucrative opportunities for people who aren't specialists or practice owners. And I was neither of those things. And so I stayed in the Twin Cities in an emergency practice for the first year and a half after my internship, something like that, about a year and a half. And this was an emergency practice that did small animal and exotic and wildlife, which I loved. I loved all the species. And then I moved back to Washington, D.C., where I had gone to undergrad, and became an emergency doctor at a big private practice in D.C. that was actually a multi-doctor, multi-specialty practice called Friendship Hospital for Animals. And I was there for a few years. And I started to apply. I did my plan. I saved up enough money to go back and do a residency without defaulting on my loans. And I started to apply for residency. And as many people in this profession are aware, most people expect folks to do their internship and their residency right away after school. And folks who've done stuff other than that look unusual. Now, we're not actually unusual. If you talk to specialists, many people didn't go straight from school to internship to residency. But there's this, in my opinion, misperception that's uncommon. And so as a person who's in private emergency practice applying for academic internal medicine residencies, I got a lot of, raised eyebrows and curious looks. And I also didn't get a residency many times in a row. And so I, in continued efforts to try to improve my resume and my experiences and broaden my horizons and make myself a better candidate and continue to do fun stuff in veterinary medicine, I ended up getting a Cancer Research Training Award fellowship at the NIH in Bethesda. So on the main campus of the NIH in Bethesda, while I was working as a clinician in Northwest DC. So I would spend sort of 4 days a week at the lab, and then I was working also 4 days a week at the clinic, which I realize is 8 days, and there's only 7 in the week. So there were days that I worked at both jobs, right? So I would do both jobs. I would go to the lab in the day, and I would work a second shift at the clinic. I loved it. It was fascinating. I learned so much about research. I learned so much about grants and how all of that works. I learned so much about the scope and capacity of the research enterprise in this country, and how to manage a large program. I managed a colony of dogs who had a particular disorder that the folks that I was working with were studying in people, and realized that this also happened to dogs. And so they began to study it in dogs as a way of developing bone marrow transplants and other things that could be used in people. And it was really, really important to my later career as a researcher. It might also have helped my resume as a residency applicant, but it was really important to my career as a researcher and my understanding of what was possible.
What was it in dogs that you were researching?
Leukocyte adhesion deficiency. This is an immunodeficiency disorder that occurs spontaneously in people, and it also occurs spontaneously in dogs, particularly Irish setters. One of the things about genetic disorders of dogs is pretty quickly when we recognize them, we can make them go away because we stop breeding the dogs that have them. And so leukocyte adhesion deficiency is almost never seen anymore because we figured out what caused it and we stopped breeding dogs who had it, right? So, and that's relatively easier to do in dogs than it is in people, right? If you figure out what the genetic disorder is in a person, you don't say, hey, turns out you're a carrier for this, you can't have kids, right? That's not what we do with people. And so, so we are more quickly able to eliminate diseases from dogs than we are from people when they have a known genetic origin.
And that reminds me of the Zoobiquity book, but this was way before that. And I'm guessing years before that. And how fascinating to be focused on that One Health focus and to really see that change. And so where did that residency take you from a research perspective?
Yeah, so this was, this was a fellowship I had at NIH for 3 years. And so then from there, as I was continuing to apply for internal medicine residencies, I eventually made a connection with Craig Green at the University of Georgia. He's an infectious disease guru, and he's retired now. And that's really what I wanted to study. And he became a mentor and an advocate for me. And when I was not matching into residencies, he contacted me and he said, I know you didn't get the residency, but we need an emergency doctor down here. And if you'd be willing to come to Georgia as an emergency doctor, you'd be applying for a residency from a position on the faculty. And I feel like that's got to help. So I said, okay. And so I moved to Athens and took an emergency faculty position. And then I did. As a faculty member on the staff, I applied for a residency in the hospital where I was working. And I ultimately did match into that residency. And I did a master's with Craig Green in infectious disease. And Fred Quinn was my other mentor, and we worked on mycobacterium. And so, all of that came together. And I think my understanding of what was possible in research led to me being interested in and unafraid of doing a master's with my residency. I also think that my years of private practice made my residency easier for me than it was for some of my colleagues who did come straight out of internship into residency.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I definitely didn't work harder in my residency than I had worked when I was working days in the lab and nights in the clinic in practice in DC, right? So for me, it was all quite a manageable workload and not harder than my previous jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that back to our conversation about being in the panic zone or the stretch zone for learning. I mean, for me as a resident, I took biochemistry as a graduated veterinarian who had been in practice for 6 years. I had taken biochemistry as an undergrad, but when you talk about the Krebs cycle, having treated diabetic patients, you just learn it differently. It's just different. It's just different. And I was sitting in biochem as part of my master's at UGA with all these undergrads. And I was just loving it. It was so fun. And it's the same equations that it ever had been and the same molecules that it ever had been. But my capacity to understand why this mattered and how to fit it into my understanding of my patients was just light years ahead of what it had been when I was 19 years old, taking it as an undergrad. So,
and what a gift, right? I mean, what a gift to be able to have that life experience that you can apply specifically. And as you're learning this, you're remembering those cases and those animals. And that's completely different than just reading it in those things 100%. Called books. Yeah.
100%. I mean, it was delightful, and not many people taking a master's and have their required biochemistry or their required stats course are like, this is so great.
I'm imagining you're just like the happiest person in the classroom. Like, this is so cool. And all the other students are like, fantastic. Oh my gosh.
and I think the other thing too is like, I already had a doctorate. If I got a B in my master's degree biochemistry, I was still a doctor, right? And so some of that pressure for performance was removed and a lot of things. Anyway, so that was all just a terrific educational experience.
Okay, so you're at Georgia and you get your master's and now you've done residency. I was incorrect, obviously. Calling the NIH residency before, my mistake. So that was the fellowship. So you've done your residency and you're getting your master's and you're in research.
Yep. Yeah. So I did this research degree for my master's. All residents are required to do a little bit of publication, and the magnitude of the research that you do to go along with it can vary. So many people do a clinical publication as part of their residency, but people who do a joint master's or PhD program will also do benchtop research. So I did. So this time I was doing a cell-based research using cells from catfish to try to cultivate this particular mycobacterium species that affects fish, but is very similar to TB, but it's safer to study in fish because it's not transmissible to people. And so for all of those reasons, it was a really interesting project. It was right in the middle of infectious disease. I was learning techniques. I hadn't previously done bench work, so that was good. And again, knowing that what I wanted was a faculty career. And so I was finishing my residency with research experience at the federal level, a research degree and a master's. I didn't have a PhD. I don't have a PhD. I probably will never have a PhD. Never say never. And feeling like I could set myself up to be a competitive applicant for faculty positions in internal medicine. And so finished my residency, my master's, and applied for all the internal medicine positions that were open at faculty level positions all around the country. There were like 4 that year, maybe 5. And I ended up staying at the University of Georgia. They offered to hire me and I decided to stay for a variety of reasons. And I think it was a good decision. And so now I had been there as a faculty member in emergency. Then I was a resident for 3 years, and then I was back at the faculty meetings. I'm like, hello, it's me again.
Hey again.
Hello. We've met. So I was early in my faculty career, and I wasn't going to continue my research with fish because I was in small animal medicine and companion animal, dogs and cats. And so while I had learned a lot from that work, it made sense to try to leverage that towards something that was a little more clinically applicable to what I was doing. And so this is what happened. As an early career person, you look for collaborators, right? I had Craig Green and I had other people in the department and other people I had met at conferences and things, and you're forever looking for collaborators to help launch your research. And some of those conversations go well and some go nowhere, and you never really know what's going to stick, but you throw it all at the wall and you hope something sticks. So I was sitting there, this is, weeks into my job, and the hospital director, a man named Doug Allen, who's also retired at this time, who had been my friend and mentor as I was a resident. He was just a terrific veterinarian and a really good person and smart about managing people and smart about managing a hospital. And
which is
I learned
hard.
a lot from, which is hard. And I learned a lot from watching him and how he connected with people and how he made decisions. Anyway, he reached out to me, and I'm pretty sure this is a direct quote. He said, "Hey, Creeves, you're new. You're not doing anything. I got this guy in genetics that keeps calling me up, and he wants to talk about these dogs or something and why they died and genetics and stuff. Will you go talk to this guy?" And I was like, I don't know. I mean, I know about genetics in the sense that I know the gene that causes leukocyte adhesion deficiency in the dog, and that's about it. Like, I certainly don't know anything about genetics. I wasn't really looking for a collaboration like that. And then I thought, he's right that I'm new and I'm not really doing anything, and I'm supposed to be looking for collaborators, and you just got to keep trying, right? So I was like, sure, I'll go meet this guy. So I went and met this geneticist whose name is Daniel Promislo. And long story short, he has been my collaborator ever since. And he and I, with our other colleague, Matt Kaberlein, co-founded and launched the Dog Aging Project. And truly, that meeting, that initial meeting, was just one of dozens of potential collaborators that I had met with that semester, trying to make something get started. And I'm really, really fortunate that this is what got started. But also, I think, there's just a testament to how many of those meetings I went into thinking, this is going to be my new favorite person, and then it didn't work. Ooh, this is my new exciting collaboration, and it didn't work. And then this one that I sort of felt like I'm doing it as a favor to my friend Doug. And this turns into the collaboration that has defined my research career. So pretty fascinating stuff.
It's super fascinating. And to speak back to residency wasn't the typical path because it wasn't immediately after an internship, and you're in practice and you get this fellowship, which then helps you understand and find interest in this research, right? That,
yep.
I mean, you made that tie then, and there must have been a moment there to think, wow, I can see where my path has really led me to this. Right. And those are like the best moments. Like, that's where all the good stuff is. Right. And so you're embarking on this research at Georgia, and how does that path go?
Yeah. So what happened was that Daniel had become interested in the genetics of aging in dogs. He studies aging genetics, and the fact that dogs of different sizes have different lifespans is pretty obvious to all of us who are veterinarians and dog lovers. And so dogs of different sizes have different lifespans, which means dogs of different breeds have different lifespans because breeds are different sizes. And that creates an opportunity to look at it genetically. So that's what he was interested in. And he had obtained a data set from the Veterinary Medical Database, which is a terrific database that was started in the 60s by the National Cancer Institute, tracking the summary information from physical exams of the dog, cat, horse, and cow that happened at veterinary teaching hospitals around the country. So just this vast database back when nobody was doing vast databases. And he had obtained a data set from them to try to look at causes of death in different breeds of dogs. And it was 88,000 dogs. And then he realized that the way these diseases were coded in the records really required a veterinarian to understand what the cause of death probably was for each dog. We don't really do cause of death in veterinary medicine the way they do on a human, like autopsy report, or the medical examiner says what the cause of death was, or your physician says what the cause of death was. We don't really formally document that often in veterinary medicine. And so he had these records of 88,000 dogs who had died, and at the time of death, the list of things that were wrong with them, but that's not the same as knowing what their likely cause of death was. And so he needed to collaborate with veterinarians to figure that out. So I said, well, I don't know much about genetics, and I know very little about aging, but I know about dog disease. And so I think I can do this, right? So I worked with one of my residents at the time, Jamie Fleming, and we developed a system between the two of us, and we went through this data set line by line, assigning cause of death. It took a very long time. And led to a paper that was really, really, really popular, got a lot of popular press coverage, as well as being very frequently cited and downloaded within the veterinary medical literature. And because we had coded this data set, then we could go back to it again and again and ask different questions and say, well, now first let's describe what dogs of different breeds die from. Great. Okay, now that we've said that, how does it affect it if they're spayed or castrated or not? How does it affect it if they have a certain specific disease early in life, or they like to get other diseases later in life? And so we were able to use this same data set to answer many questions, but it had a lot of limitations. And so Daniel and I began to talk about, we should go out and recruit a population of dogs and build our own lifespan data set from dogs, like the Baltimore Longitudinal Study of Aging or the Framingham Heart Study, where you enroll people early and you wait for them to develop the diseases of aging when they age. But you've collected data about them for their whole lives. And so then when aging outcomes occur, you can look back and say, is there anything earlier that could have helped us predict this, right? And those are fantastic studies, but people live as long as people. And so dogs live a whole lot shorter.
Yeah.
And in the research career of a person, you can't study the life of a person because you're also a person. Right?
There's this
sort of
human
a logistical
aspect
problem,
to that, right?
Sort of and so, but for a dog, right, in the research career of a person, you can study many, many sequential lifespans of dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so we started talking about it. I don't even know when, a long time ago. And just step by step, chip by chip, kind of moved towards this. So first we got a small grant to look at, a small local population of dogs. And then we got a grant that enables us, it's called a network and infrastructure grant from the NIH. And it enables you to bring together researchers to design a collaboration. So they actually fund the work that it takes to build the infrastructure that enables you to propose another project for them to fund. And so we had a network and infrastructure grant. We worked on that for a few years and traveled around the country and met all sorts of people and held 3 major meetings and brought all these people together who were experts in dog aging and genetics and large clinical trial design and all this stuff to try to say, can this be done and what would it look like if we were going to do it? And the fascinating part was, most of the veterinarians that we met said, no, it can't be done. It's too big. Veterinarian is too much. It's too big. We don't have enough money. Veterinarians are cheap. We can't do big, complicated things. We're just trying to keep our practices functioning. Like this is outside the scope.
And what time frame, like years are we talking?
So this will be, let's see, I finished my residency in 2007. I started working with Daniel very shortly thereafter. We got the R24, I think, in 2011 or 12. So this is 12, 13, 14, 2015.
And we should clarify for the listeners, what we are talking about is the dog aging project, which is now very much going on. Is very much going on and is one of your current roles, not your only role, but one of your current roles in veterinary medicine currently.
That's right. Yeah. And so a lot of people felt that it was just too big, too ambitious, over the top, outside the scope. This isn't what veterinarians do. And I think Daniel is an unbelievable optimist. Daniel is always able to see how something can go well, which is a terrific attribute to have. And I think my experience in research at the federal level gave me a different perspective than many of my career colleagues in veterinary medicine. Mm-hmm. I knew that big research could happen. I knew how much money was available to fund it. I knew how much infrastructure was already in place. And I think that's because I had worked at the NIH, right? I had seen
Again, you had that experience, which set you up for success here, really.
That's right. So we started to submit grants to say we're going to launch a nationwide study of aging in people's pet dogs, and we're going to enroll somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 dogs in this study. And we certainly failed. We submitted a grant that was, reviewed, scored badly, and we were given the opportunity to revise, but not with any expectation that we would be successful. We, changed our design. We actually changed grant mechanisms. There are a bunch of different ways to submit grants at the NIH, and the way that they get reviewed and the way they get funded can vary. And sometimes there are reasons that a particular idea is better suited for a different mechanism. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, in 2018, we successfully received funding to launch the dog aging project. And
that's
so
incredible.
It was 15 institutions and 30 or 40 people and 5-year funding of about $30 million.
Oh my gosh. So 2018, that would take you to just beyond COVID.
Correct. And so
or tail end rough, or depending on how you
yeah.
what and that so timeline of yours is.
We received our funding announcement in the end of 2018, in like October or November of 2018. We had given ourselves 6 to 12 months to build out the infrastructure, create all of the online tools that were going to be necessary, build publicity so that people were ready to sign up. A lot of what we do is collect survey-based data. So we had to get all of our surveys robustly programmed and make sure that they worked and that their questions were clear. And we went through lots of pilot testing and review and changes to make sure everything was workable for participants. We really wanted everyday people who own dogs in all 50 states. Like, we didn't want this to be something that was unavailable to a person with a dog because it required specialized research knowledge or specialized access. We didn't want that. If you had a computer with an internet connection, we wanted it to be that was enough. And so it took us about a year to get all of that organized. And we had this big kickoff event in November of 2019. So we had this like giant, we had this big coordinated press releases at all of our universities. And there's this Gerontological Society of America. That's a research convention that frequently has a public facing lecture. So that was our kickoff lecture, and it was in Austin, and we did so we had all of this stuff going on. And we got all this enthusiasm. And the first step is to nominate your dog. And we had like 27,000 nominations in 72 hours or something. It was crazy. It was people were just over the top nominating dogs. There's dogs coming in from all over the place. And so after you nominate your dog, then you get access to your research portal and you create a password and whatever. And then you sort of trickle out these surveys for people to fill out gradually over time, right? So we're having this huge influx of people signing up. And then January 2020 comes, and then February 2020 comes, and then March 2020 comes. And in March 2020, we were having a meeting of the whole research team in Seattle, because we've just kicked off and we've now got to manage all of these people. And I literally was boarding the plane when the cases in Seattle were breaking and they were shutting down the city. And I'm on the phone with Daniel, and I'm walking down the little thing to get on the plane. And I'm like, should I still come? He's like, I think we're going to cancel. I mean, we can't be the people who brought 50 researchers from around the country to Seattle and gave them all this new disease that we didn't know was called COVID yet, right? We hadn't yet gotten to the acronym, and we can't be those people. And so we're going to have to cancel the meeting. And I'm like, I'm sure you and I have stuff we can still talk about. I mean, I'm actually boarding the plane, And so he's like, yeah, why don't you go ahead and come and we'll work on stuff. Well, I mean, I got there and Seattle was a ghost town. The cab ride from the airport to Daniel's house, like, it was as if it was the middle of the night. There was nobody on the road.
I remember those days getting on the freeway, and it was just nothing. Nothing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, like any movie of the apocalypse you've ever seen. 100%.
Yeah.
And so I got there and we were like, this is not, I don't know what we're going to do about this. And then like now we were supposed to be there for 5 days, and there's a pandemic happening and the rest of the people aren't there. And he and I kind of worked through some things. I'm like, I don't feel like I should stay here. And anyway, so I wanted to leave early. I was supposed to leave on Saturday or something. And I was like, this doesn't make sense for me to stay. Like, we can work remotely and this, I don't know what I'm doing here. And this also is a place where there's lots of this new disease and I don't really want to get it. And so I called the airport on Thursday. I'm like, hello, I'd like to rebook my flight. I'm supposed to go home on Saturday. And they're like, okay. And I'm like, do you need to know what flight it is? And they're like, whatever. I'm like, well, it's, Seattle to Houston. They're like, it'll be fine. I'm like, is there a change fee? And they're like, no. And I'm like, do I need to?
They're like, please just come on our plane.
Seat? They're like, the plane's going to be empty. You can sit wherever you want. And I went to the airport 2 days early, and I got on a plane with like 6 other people. Yeah. Wow. Then people were stuck in their homes.
Right.
For many months.
With their dogs.
I think that what a lot of them did was fill out dog aging project surveys.
Yeah.
I actually think for many people, it was a reason to participate because it was something to do that they were interested in that was different and novel, and it involved their dog, and they were home anyway. And I mean, we have a very strong participant base, and they're very committed to the project. But I think for some people in that peculiar time, it was a reason to be involved. And maybe if the world had been behaving normally,
That's
we wouldn't
true.
have had such a strong commitment from people who kind of got in the ground floor and feel really, really strongly connected to the Dog Aging Project.
Yeah. And especially during that time, they were so isolated, right? It was the highest numbers of adoptions,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
they were home. And so there
Yep.
was that connection, I think, that so many people were missing that a lot of people made with their animals, right? And
Yep.
then the opposite was true when people started going back to work, right? That's a whole
Yep.
other situation. But
Yep.
that connection of, oh, this animal, and the connection with dogs specifically in this instance, and feeling I want this dog to live, I want this dog to
Yeah.
age well, and to
Yeah.
feeling also that you gave them something that they felt they could do something about, right? So they're living
Yep.
in this fear that we talk about, right? And there's so much fear because there's just huge unknowns, right? For a lot of
Yep.
people. But they know they love this animal and there's a connection to this
Yep.
person. And here's something I can do from my computer with this animal that encourages this animal. I mean, it was sort of the perfect storm for that sort of participation almost.
Yeah. I think that's true. And I
Yeah.
think, you know, there was a lot of stuff we didn't understand about COVID, and there were a lot of
Yeah.
people working to figure it out. But the average person wasn't in a position to help with the
Right.
pandemic,
Right.
right? The average
Helpless.
person
Yeah.
wasn't in a position to go into their laboratory and start doing tissue cultures of viruses, right? Like that,
Right.
that wasn't something. And yet, I think most people understand that science and medicine are important, and science and medicine are connected. And this might have been a way that they felt like they could be involved in the future and the growth of science and medicine, even if they couldn't do anything about the particular virus that was on everybody's mind.
Right. And it was something that was an action that they could take, which made them feel like they had some control, right? Some participation that they could have, while connection with community, while caring for this animal that, means so much, and was really, for a lot of people, a lifeline during that time of huge isolation, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Completely agree. So our participants are super motivated and deeply connected to the project, and we acknowledge that the entire project depends upon these volunteer citizen scientists, community scientists who are providing information about their dogs. We go to a lot of trouble to make sure that the information is returned to them, that we've learned from their dogs, and they deserve to learn what we've learned. And so every time we have a publication, we'll do a blog post summarizing it in lay-friendly language for people who don't read or don't know how to read scientific publications.
Yeah.
We do monthly webinars with our participants that we focus on particular topics of interest that are interactive, and they can ask questions and meet the people who've done the research and meet the people who are, doing some of the analyses in our labs. And a lot of that started during those times. And I think, our events were very well attended, and our blogs were heavily subscribed because, again, I think it was a way for people to feel like they were part of something, they were helping, they were learning. It was an exterior stimulus in a time when there wasn't always a lot of that was very uplifting. And
and that connection that a lot of people were really missing, and is vital for us as humans.
Yeah, for sure.
And so were you at Georgia this whole time doing this?
So I was at Georgia until 2016. So we met at Georgia and worked together there for a number of years. Daniel ultimately got recruited out to Seattle. So he was at the University of Washington. And then I got recruited here to Texas A&M, and so came here in 2016. So we've maintained our long distance collaboration that whole time. Daniel has since now moved back out to Boston, and he's at Tufts University now. And we like to say we were on Zoom before it was cool. So we started with this nationwide collaborative group before the pandemic. So we ran all of our research meetings by Zoom and met, made all of our connections and made all of our hiring and firing decisions, and created protocols and created research workflows and
so you were set up for success by the time COVID came.
That's right. We had been on Zoom pretty consistently for the 18 months before everybody in the world was on Zoom, and other virtual platforms, obviously. And so that's been a part of the project all along, is that we're very hybrid in-person teams with lots and lots of virtual connections all over the country.
And what is your role now at Texas A&M?
I'm a professor of internal medicine in small animal clinical sciences department. So I still have a clinical appointment. I do still do work on clinics, although the amount of time I spend on clinics is getting smaller over the years. I teach as well in the veterinary curriculum. So I actually teach in all 4 years of the curriculum, first, second, third, and then clinical students in the fourth year. And I am the co-director of the Dog Aging Project, which is still going on. Our original funding, it was a 5-year grant in 2018 because some of the things that we wanted to do during COVID couldn't be done. We ended up with a substantial part of our first year budget that couldn't be spent. And we were allowed to do what the NIH calls carry forward and spend it at the end of the grant. And so we actually, the 5 years of funding that were granted, we actually spent out over about 6.25 years. But we are now not currently federally funded for the Dog Aging Project. We've just submitted another grant to try to renew a 5-year funding support. So we literally submitted that like 3 weeks ago, and I hope for good news after the first of the year. We obviously haven't heard anything from anybody in the government shutdown time, but we expect to have a review and hopefully favorable review and funding after the first of the year. We've broken off several portions of the project that are funded separately. So we have a clinical trial that is federally funded right now, testing low-dose rapamycin in aging dogs. And then we have grants from other non-federal agencies and philanthropic funding continuing to support the project. But we are still here. We're going strong. We hope to continue to be. We look forward to a good review and funding decision for this central grant through the NIA. That would be really, really beneficial to us to have that as a core source of support for the next 5 years and beyond.
So incredible. I mean, when I first heard about this project, I just thought this is so amazing, and how just, I mean, for veterinary medicine, for animal lovers, for the One Health conversation. I mean, just all of it. It is just fascinating. And where would you like to see this project in 10 years or 5 years? I mean, 5 years, you just stated you'd like that grant to go out 5 years.
Yeah, I would love it. I'd love it to have that grant for the next 5 years and then, continued funding beyond. I mean, I think for me, this project has a number of factors that really resonate with me. One, I love that we're studying anybody with a dog who wants to log on and fill out surveys. Yeah. Much of veterinary medical research is done in teaching hospitals because that's where the researchers work. Or it's done by industry with a specific objective in mind.
Right.
And teaching hospital patients and cases aren't typical, right? So the teaching hospitals mostly see complex, severe, undiagnosable, or weird diseases. And that's an important role. And that's what I do in my clinical practice. And I enjoy it. And that needs to happen. But if that's the patients from whom you're recruiting your studies, it's hard to study common things. You mostly have access to study weird and unusual things. So I love that we are studying typical dogs, dogs who never end up in a teaching hospital in their life, dogs who never need to see a specialist in their life. I hope that for most dogs, they never need to see a specialist in their life.
Right.
And so the people who sign up their dogs for the Dog Aging Project didn't have to go through some medical event or experience to be eligible. They're eligible because they have a dog and they felt like signing up. So I love that part of it. And I think that's going to provide information that we don't currently have easy access to about dog health in this country. We don't really know rates of common diseases among typical dogs. We know rates of diseases at teaching hospitals, but it's not the same. So I think that's really great and exciting.
And it's exciting because you're allowing like animal lovers with a low barrier of entry to feel like they're participating, right? And I think that really also encourages positivity within veterinary medicine, right? Because these are animal lovers that want to do something, but to your point, unless their animal is very sick, they might not be able to have that experience, and then that experience is not an enjoyable one, right? So this allows them to have an enjoyable one with a low barrier of entry. They can do it from their computer. I love all that.
The other thing about it for me is that I firmly believe that biomedical science is critical to the future of humanity. And I am not overstating the case when I say the future of humanity. Right. And we are at a cultural moment in which the value of science and even the value of anything that could be called a fact has come under question.
Right.
And I think that is a dangerous and destructive direction for us to go. Mm-hmm. We need science. We need truth. We need facts. We need to understand how things work. You can make whatever choices you want about how to manage a medical problem or a scientific problem, but not until you understand what the problem actually is. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where, policy has a role in disease management. Policy has a role in how we fund or don't fund certain types of therapies. But political figurations shouldn't play into what the facts are, right? What the facts are. And so I think the need for more people to have more touch points with how science is done has never been stronger. We need more Americans to understand this is how we do it. We gather data, mm-hmm. we carefully inspect the data, we interpret what the data show us, and then then we can talk about the politics of how do we manage that disease for the nation, fine. Mm-hmm. But first we have to understand how biology works. And biology doesn't care who you voted for. And biology doesn't care if you believe in it, right? Biology is going to happen the way biology happens, regardless of someone's viewpoint on the world. And I think that science feels to many people distant and mysterious, mm-hmm. but this project can demystify that. All we are asking you to do is tell us what happened to your dog.
Yeah.
And if enough people tell us what happened to their dog, we can learn things about what happens to dogs. It's very accessible, and then we can help them.
Right.
So I think the project speaks to me in that sense as well, because I feel like this is a really important cultural dimension of how veterinary medicine can be part of the solution to this sort of shift away from confidence in science. Mm-hmm. So I love that. And it's an open data project. What that means is that we make our raw data freely available to the research community.
I love that.
Anyone who wants to can contact the Dog Aging Project. You fill out an agreement that says you won't sell the data, you won't try to make any money from it, you won't try to discover anybody's identity through whatever personally identifying information, all of those components. And then please analyze the data and publish your findings. We want you to go analyze the data and publish your findings. This means that veterinarians can start using our data and they don't have to go collect it, and they don't have to worry about funding how they can collect it. I mentioned that when I was a resident, I did my research project in a laboratory on the bench, and most of my colleagues in residency used clinical data, medical records, these sorts of things for their research projects. They can use Dog Aging Project data now.
That's amazing.
So any resident who wants to use our data can do so. Any intern who wants to, any early career faculty member before they have their own lab up and running can use our data. And so that's another thing about the project that I'm really proud of, and I hope can be of service to the veterinary profession.
I think that's incredible. And I love all of it. I love the positivity towards veterinary profession, and love how animal lovers are able to participate, because I think it just allows that accessibility, low barrier of entry, which is just so amazing. And, we all want our dogs to live longer. So I so appreciate your time today. And I feel like I could just sit here and talk to you for hours with so many questions. But I know that our listeners only have so much time. So I kind of just want to close out with, do you have a secret talent or something that you enjoy doing that others might not know about? I always get the most unexpected answers to this. So tell us, Katie.
So I have many hobbies, and I work hard, but I play hard too. And I really enjoy doing all sorts of things. But I think the one that always surprises people is that I am a classically trained singer.
Whoa!
And I have
didn't see that coming.
I have many years of background in musical theater and singing performance, and I've been in city choirs and university choirs and sung at weddings, and
that's amazing. I love it.
Yeah. So nothing I'm doing professionally or actively, and honestly nowhere near as much as I would like, but something I certainly continue to enjoy.
Well, that's incredible. I never would have seen that coming. And what a well-rounded way to spend your time. And talent to have. I love that. Is there anything else you want to leave our audience with today?
No, I'm really grateful for the opportunity. And I love that part of the mission of the foundation. And when you and I spoke about this podcast is I think it's important for people who are interested in veterinary careers to know that there's so many ways to be successful, so many paths that work. It is not a cookie cutter experience, and your path is the path for you, and it's different from someone else's. And I think that's great. And I just invite people to check us out at thedogagentproject.org, sign up your dog, access our data, collaborate with our team. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and we will put all those links in the episode notes. So all of you listening who are interested can go explore, and we'll put some of the links we mentioned today as well. Thank you so much for your time, Katie. I really appreciate your time and effort. And thank you for everything that you're doing to help our animals and dogs and learn how we can help give them more life, because I definitely know I want that with my dog. So.
I know. Everybody does. We want our dogs to live long and well.
Long and well. Exactly. Long and well. Thank you so much, Katie.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Veterinary Pulse. Please check the episode notes for additional information referenced in the podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow, subscribe, and share a review. We welcome feedback and hope you will tune in again. You can find out more about the VIN Foundation through our website, vinfoundation.org, and our social media channels. Thank you for being here. Be well.